God Save the Queen, a solo riff by Brian May, guitarist for Queen, the rock band, belting it out for Queen and country on top of Buckingham Palace. People across the Commonwealth celebrating Queen Elizabeth II and her 60th year reign as our monarch. Now, you don't have to be an avid royal watcher to know that she's brought more grace and dignity to the British crown than any world leader living today. The royal family isn't as big a part of Canadians' lives as they used to be, but I'm proud to call her our head of state, and I know many citizens of our nation feel the same way. Bloc Québécois MPs, they feel differently. They're jilting the Jubilee, at least 6 of them, all 4 Bloc Québécois members and 2 New Democrats, returning their Queen Elizabeth II Diamond Jubilee medals. 6 of the total 60,000 Jubilee medals that are being handed out this year. Medals being given out to Canadians who've made significant contributions to their communities. Now, what's their reason, these 4 Bloc Québécois members and the 2 NDP members from Quebec? They say it's a protest of the federal government spending on monarchy celebrations. Members of the Bloc and NDP protesting that the government is spending too much money. Oh, that's rich. What's really going on here? It's time to translate the tantrum. It's time for some Canadian common sense. First, let's do the facts, the hard numbers on what's supposedly at issue here. The Conservatives have budgeted $7.5 million for various events and festivities to honor the Queen's big day, recognizing the value of the monarchy and its role in the proud traditions of this country. Canada is a constitutional monarchy that adopted the values and laws of Great Britain, laws and values that form the foundation of our great country. Our ongoing ties with the Crown are recognition of who we are as a nation. It's the same logic that had our country return the royal designation to our Air Force and Navy. It's our history, and these initiatives help to ensure that all Canadians will remember where those values came from. It preserves our identity. Canada's Heritage Minister, James Moore, sums it up quite well. We're not dropping a wad of cash into her purse like some collection plate. The Queen's medals are a special honor, allowing Canada to recognize many of its unsung heroes, regular folks whose good deeds often go unnoticed. As the minister says, it's the person who volunteers at the rink that you never think of, the pastor who helps kids who never get recognized, people who volunteer and give back, veterans, community leaders, acknowledging Canadian role models who selflessly volunteer their time to make our country a better place and have their efforts recorded in a public registry. This isn't about some elitist award for the Ottawa Inner Circle like the Order of Canada. This is about recognizing the contributions of the people I call John and Mary Canadian Tire, who've gone way above and beyond the call of duty. These aren't some cheap trinkets. They honor the Queen and the average Canadian at the same time. The 60,000 Jubilee medals will cost about $3.5 million, a pittance in our country's federal budget. But hey, as a fiscal conservative, I appreciate now more than ever, with budgets tightening everywhere, every dollar needs to be accounted for, justified. This $3.5 million does make sense. I'll tell you why. But first, let's take a closer look at these protesting MPs and their true motivations. Louis Plamondon, Bloc MP riding of Richelieu-Nicolet. B.A. Cancour, who happens to be Canada's longest-serving MP, declared that the Jubilee medals are a waste of money. A Bloc MP calling something a waste of money. Keep in mind that he comes from the same party whose 2011 policy statement outright demanded $5 billion in transfer payments from the Canadian government that they disdain so much, the Queen's government. These medals only cost $3.5 million. We've done the math, 0.07% of what the Bloc Québécois wanted to shake down the Canadian government for. Now, this is more about appeasing the separatist, anti-monarchist sentiment in Quebec, which is what they're doing. One nationalist group, Montreal Société Saint-Jean-Baptiste, has actually announced plans for anti-Queen celebrations. Sounds like fun, doesn't it? Let me know where to drop off the Kool-Aid. This is about hammering home Quebec nationalism. But Quebec nationalists are missing a vital point. They should all be thanking the monarchy for their cushy status in Canada. Hey, if it wasn't for Queen Vicky, we'd all be Americans. How well do you think French nationalism would work out in the USA? How much political and economic capital do you think the President of the United States would exhaust in keeping French nationalists in Quebec satisfied? Our links to the Queen are the best thing that ever happened to French nationalism in Canada. Nationalist MPs can use her as a piñata, which always works for their base. They just keep sticking it to her. But objectively speaking, Elizabeth Windsor has been Quebec nationalism's best friend. To the Queen, look, I know I'm not going to sway any Quebec nationalists by saying this. I've got to say it anyway. Canada as we know it, as proud patriotic citizens of Adler Nation know it, would not exist without the British Royals. And neither would the obsessive, compulsive drive to preserve Quebec's special status. Now, look, maybe some of you watching tonight would like to see Canada undergo some sort of fundamental transformation with the Royals out of the equation. Whether you agree or disagree with me, I want to hear what you think about this. Email us, charlesadler@sunmedia.ca. I'm intrigued at the thought of reading it. But don't tell me, please don't tell me, that junking the Royals would mean anything but a fundamental transformation of Canada as we know it. And until then, while they're still a vital part of our society, please, a little courtesy, a little respect, the way they show respect to all their subjects, no matter how ungrateful some of them are. Unlike us, the Royals cannot be partisan. Please think about that the next time you complain about their free ride. And that's Canadian common sense. Canada and the monarchy, our relationship with the Royals goes deep into the roots of this great land. Who better to explain the importance of the Crown than Sun News contributor, Professor John Robson, a man with royal intellect. John, what's this all about from your perspective?
I think it's about narcissism more than anything else. This kind of self-absorption that makes people who don't like the political system think they can just make it go away by a rude gesture. I mean, for heaven's sakes, if the Quebec separatists, they want to go under the rule of law, and that means an orderly procedure in which, in the end, the Queen or her successor would put their name on the law that got Quebec out of Canada. You know, but they're unwilling to be civil about a situation they don't like, and then they come up with this piddle. It's about the money. They say, oh, $7.5 million. Do you know? You probably do. How much the Canadian government spends on debt servicing every day? $84 million. Has one of these MPs ever complained about that? The government spends $3.5 million an hour paying interest on the debt. Have they said a word about that while calling for more social spending, as you mentioned, the equalization, but also we need universal daycare, we need more money for healthcare, blah, blah, blah. They're throwing billions around, and then they come up with this pitiful excuse for why they're against these medals, which has nothing to do with the fact that they're just having a snit over the fact that they're in Canada and Canada's a monarchy. As if Quebec's liberties, including langue, loi, et foi, guaranteed to them under the British monarchy, would have been likely to be protected under any other system.
John, let me ask you, and I realize it's a hypothetical, but what if the Americans simply ran the show, the entire continent? How much time would the U.S. government have for the preservation of French culture and French language? Please tell me.
Oh, I think it's very clear. There would have been none. I mean, one of the triggers of the American Revolution, the so-called intolerable acts, one of them was the Quebec Act, extending religious toleration to Roman Catholics. And this was one of the things the American founding fathers that proved that the British were against liberty. And I think it illustrates a bind for Quebec nationalists, because at least in the old days, however foolish their beliefs, and I must say they set some rather spectacular standards that way, Quebec nationalists valued Quebec's past, which they thought was different from English Canada's past. They were more Catholic than the Pope, more royalist than the King of France. But modern Quebec nationalists have sawed through the branch on which they sit. What is it that sustains Quebec as a distinct society? It's not their past. I mean, again, Jacques Cartier, And people like that, praised monarchy. The Quebec members of Canada's founding fathers talked about one of the things they thought came from the French tradition was monarchy. But these people have no use for monarchy any more than they have any use for the Catholic Church, or, as far as I can see, anything else out of their past. And they're reduced to kind of like doing a pirouette behind the Queen's back in a juvenile expression of distaste for reality.
I can't think, John, I mean, as I look at the world, and you've got a better handle on this than I do, but, I've read a little bit, and I just can't think of any place in the world where any minority in any country has as much clout, as much power, as much people working for the central government, constantly looking over their shoulders, making sure that everything's going hunky-dory. I just can't imagine any minority anywhere in the world doing better than those French nationalists we're talking about.
Yeah, and I think this is an argument a lot of people would make in English Canada who are not themselves ardent monarchists, as though the whole thing kind of existed in a vacuum or suspended in midair. People don't like to think about the constitutional roots of our liberty and tolerance. But having the head of state be above the political fray is a very useful guarantee of kind of fair play. But the Queen of England, she has an audience with the British Prime Minister once a week. She gives advice, she gets information. It seems like the Queen usually has a lot more information to give than to get. She's extremely well informed, but nobody ever talks about what is said. It's a source of advice for the Prime Minister that is not tied up with the political battles of the day. And if we come to a constitutional crisis, at some point we need a voice to speak for decency. Because the monarch is not on either side in any of the quarrels we're having, there is legitimacy to that institution that no engaged partisan has. Take Barack Obama, love him or hate him. He's not just the head of state, he's also the head of a political party and the head of government, so he's got a dog in every fight. It's an extraordinarily decent system. And again, Quebec's liberty, again, even those Quebecers are willing to concede they've been treated pretty well, which I don't think includes these Bloc MPs, don't recognize that constitutional monarchy played a major part in their being treated so well, a bulwark against the passions of the majority. I mean, Canada's founding fathers claimed the United States was too democratic, that the mob went unchecked, and when the mob didn't like a minority, that minority had no real guarantee of its rights. And again, I don't know, Quebecers think they've done badly in Canada. Amazes me. If they think that they've done badly partly because we're a monarchy, they're just not. They've got both feet firmly planted in the air on that one.
So you would agree that the Windsor family is the best thing that ever happened to them?
Well, it's not just the Windsors. I mean, George III, who was obviously not the best thing that ever happened to the country, and indeed, to some extent, tried to subvert British liberties, but it was under him and under the Parliament that flourished in the wake of the Glorious Revolution that it was not possible for Englishmen, and I speak politically, not linguistically, to be deprived of their rights, including those who lived in Quebec. And it is very important that there was the Hanovers in those days. And again, these were sort of odious individuals and not all that happy with constitutional restraints on their power, but those restraints were too strong for the king. It's the system of constitutional monarchy that gave Quebecers the freedom and the rights that they treasure and the space to develop their culture. It happens that Queen Elizabeth II is an exemplary individual, but constitutional monarchy doesn't depend upon that. There have been some very scurvy monarchs and some reformed knaves, William IV in particular, but the system is what guarantees liberty, the institutions. And people in Canada don't talk about that. It's like, oh, I don't like this middle. I think I'll throw it back and invent an excuse. You salute the rank, not the man, and you respect an institutional structure that has protected your liberty, because in so much of the world, so little regard for rights, minorities, individuals, under systems that they think it's better. It's more democratic. They have referendums. They've got presidents. Phooey. We're free in this country. It's being nibbled away at as the separation of powers is. But the system guaranteed liberty for 1,000 years. And that is not something to sneer at.
John, thank you so much.
My pleasure.
Appreciate it.
Save the Queen.
You're always giving us far more than we're asking for. You're super serving us. Holy Hanover. Thank you so much. Appreciate it.